Yesterday, a new report came out confirming that Russia is effectively broke. This economic collapse is no longer theoretical. Its impact is now being felt as the financial stability of 700,000 jobs at a single state company has vanished. With an empty treasury and a failing war, the Kremlin's response has been a desperate hunt for 135,000 bodies to feed the front lines in Ukraine. This vicious cycle of financial ruin and forced conscription reveals a state being pushed to its absolute breaking point, unable to pay for its war or its people. The Russian economy is displaying definitive signs of a major contraction, compelling the government to implement extreme measures to shape public perception. In a decision that highlights the political sensitivity of the situation, the word recession has reportedly been forbidden on Kremlin-controlled television. This effort to control the public narrative, however, is in direct opposition to the tangible difficulties currently faced by Russian industries and their employees. The economic pressure is most apparent within Russia's largest state-owned corporations. Russian Railways, an entity that employs approximately 700,000 people and is often seen as an indicator of the nation's economic health, has ordered its employees to take 3 extra days of unpaid leave. This action, while not a formal layoff, directly reduces workers' incomes and indicates a significant drop in demand. Freight turnover on the railways, a crucial metric for industrial activity, has decreased, directly mirroring a slowdown in the vital mining and manufacturing sectors. This pattern is not an isolated incident. The automotive industry is confronting a comparable crisis. The Gorky automobile plant, which has a workforce of 20,000, and Avtovaz, Russia's largest car manufacturer employing around 40,000 people, have both transitioned to a 4-day work week. The primary goal of this change is to lower payroll costs in the face of declining revenues, without initiating mass layoffs that could trigger social unrest. It is an accounting strategy intended to maintain the appearance of full employment while simultaneously cutting labor expenses. The very foundations of Russia's resource-dependent economy are exhibiting profound weaknesses. The coal industry, a significant employer with about 150,000 workers, faces sector-wide distress with elevated bankruptcy risk. According to a Russian deputy prime minister, 30 companies within this sector, which account for 15,000 jobs, are at a high risk of going bankrupt. The industry's net losses have already doubled in comparison to the entire previous year, with a remarkable 65% of coal companies now operating at a loss. The steel production industry, where Russia ranked as the world's 5th largest producer just last year, is also in a precarious position. Major steel companies are facing the threat of insolvency, which has led the Russian government to consider a temporary suspension of debt payments. This measure is intended to prevent a wave of bankruptcies that would create a domino effect across the wider economy. The critical oil and gas sector is experiencing immense pressure, which has been intensified by Ukrainian military actions. Persistent Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian oil refineries have led to considerable disruptions. These strikes not only affect production and export volumes, but also lead to fuel shortages within the country. While initially dismissed by state media, the reality of long lines at gasoline stations was only acknowledged after international observers drew attention to the problem. The Russian newspaper Moskovsky Komsomolets directly challenged the official story, criticizing the government for treating the public as if they're little kids by denying the real-world impact of these attacks. The collective economic data provides clear evidence of this downward trend. According to Russia's state statistics agency, GDP growth slowed dramatically from 4.5% in the fourth quarter of 2024 to only 1.4% in the first quarter of 2025, and then fell again to 1.1% in the second quarter. In the first half of the year, several key indicators pointed to systemic weakness. Wholesale trade volume saw a year-on-year decrease of 4%. The mining sector, which makes up 15% of Russia's GDP, contracted by 1%. Total freight turnover fell by 0.3%, with rail freight declining by 6.6% and seaport volume dropping by 5.4%. In addition to these internal challenges, external pressures are growing. Kazakhstan, a close ally of Russia, has started to enforce Western sanctions along its border. This has severed a critical supply route for sanctioned goods, especially from China. which Russian businesses had come to depend on. The interruption of these just-in-time supply chains has resulted in many Russian companies facing empty warehouses and an inability to honor their contracts, leading to an increase in legal disputes and bankruptcies. The intensifying economic crisis has a direct and profound impact on the Russian military, creating a critical shortage of personnel. As job opportunities diminish, wages are reduced, and the cost of living increases, a substantial number of Russian citizens, especially men of military age, have attempted to leave the country. In reaction, the Kremlin has expanded exit restrictions for mobilization-eligible men, stopping hundreds of thousands of its citizens from leaving Russia. The clear strategic goal of this policy is to maintain the domestic population pool needed for military conscription and to satisfy the enormous personnel demands of the war in Ukraine. This policy was enacted alongside a recent conscription order signed by President Putin, which calls for 135,000 men to enlist in the military. However, Russian law creates a challenge for the Kremlin. Under the existing legal definition of a special military operation, instead of a formally declared war, conscripts cannot legally be sent to active combat zones outside of Russia's recognized borders. To bypass this legal obstacle, military commanders have been instructed to use persuasion skills to pressure these young conscripts into signing voluntary military contracts. Accounts from soldiers and human rights organizations suggest that these skills frequently involve coercive tactics that recall Soviet-era intelligence methods, such as intimidation, torture, and abduction. Under these conditions, the great majority of conscripts volunteer to become contract soldiers, which means they give up their legal protections and put their lives entirely under the control of the military command. The main incentive highlighted in official recruitment materials is money. The Russian government promises new recruits millions of rubles in bonuses and combat wages, presenting military service as a route to immediate financial prosperity. Yet extensive accounts from soldiers on the front lines paint a completely different picture. A video of one Russian soldier captures the pervasive sense of disappointment. He asks, "Money? Where is the money?" He goes on to say he was promised pockets full of gold, but has instead fallen 700,000 rubles into debt, while his family gets daily calls from bill collectors. This soldier's story, which has been shared extensively through informal channels, has seriously damaged recruitment efforts and caused the number of volunteers to drop significantly. With its incentive-based system failing, the Kremlin has escalated its mobilization efforts to a more coercive level. A new approach involves the random seizure of men from public areas. Russian police are now seen detaining men on city streets and compelling them into military service. To support this campaign, the government has established a bounty system. A bonus of approximately $1,130 is paid to police officers, FSB agents, National Guardsmen, and even prison guards for each civilian they successfully force to sign a military contract. To understand the power of this incentive, the starting monthly salary for a Russian police officer is about $300, with more experienced officers earning between $500 and $800. The bonus for just one conscript can be more than a month's pay, which creates a strong financial motivation for state security personnel to participate in what is essentially the abduction of their own citizens for military service. The Russian Federation is currently engaged in a conflict on two fronts: a military war in Ukraine and an economic struggle for its own survival. The systemic economic deterioration, fueled by sanctions, the high cost of the war, and the damage from Ukrainian strikes on essential infrastructure, is no longer a secondary concern. It has evolved into a central strategic vulnerability. The government's efforts to hide the crisis with media control and to manipulate employment figures are no longer sufficient to mask the real-world effects. This economic failure has produced a destructive cycle. As the state's capacity to pay its soldiers and provide real financial incentives dwindles, it is compelled to depend on increasingly oppressive and forceful methods to fulfill its manpower needs. The policy of offering bounties to security forces for conscripts marks a major escalation, transforming law enforcement into a tool of forced mobilization. While this might secure a temporary supply of soldiers, it also runs the risk of severely undermining public trust and encouraging widespread resentment, which could lead to greater social instability. Ultimately, the Kremlin's ability to finance its war is being fundamentally challenged. Without a stable economic base and the means to keep its financial promises to its soldiers, Russia's long-term capacity to maintain its military campaign in Ukraine is in grave doubt. How long can Russia sustain this two-front war? We will be tracking every development. Subscribe to our channel to ensure you don't miss our future updates on this critical issue.